Welcome to another episode of the Contagious Culture podcast. I am your host, Kyle King, and the goal of this podcast is to help you create an ecosystem of academic excellence. What is leadership and how would you define it? This is one of the questions that we often answer on the Contagious Culture podcast. We've talked about leadership, professional development of educators. What is contagious culture? How do we fundraise and develop and advance our institutions? And then we've talked about some other things that people have requested us to talk about in regards to how to empower people to just be better. But tonight's conversation is one that has been inspired by a personal conversation. And it was with a friend of mine that shared some very vulnerable things with me. And it led me to really reflect and go back to my journal and think through how these same lessons that we talked about in this conversation can apply to how we can show up as leaders in the workplace, but not specifically in the workplace within our schools. And tonight's conversation is how do we lead a school or an organization with not just empathy, but with excellence? As a leader, I believe it's paramount for you to understand the vision and the direction of where you are driving a school and organization. It is up to you to be that driver on that bus where people are getting on and off of stops, coming into the school or coming on at different times of the specific journey, and they're counting on you to be able to get them to their destination. But many of us leaders, we're driving this bus or driving this car or operating this train, and people are trusting us when they sit down and they get on the next stop, and they're trusting us to get them to the place where they believe that they will be happy, they will be seen, it is aligned with their mission, they will be valued, respected, they will be empowered and equipped, but they just can't define what that destination is. They want to grow. They want to be better. They want something that challenges them, that empowers them, that makes them feel like they are solving problems and contributing to the greater world, but they just can't define what that vision is for themselves. And I believe that it takes a great leader. I believe that it takes an intentional leader. I believe that it takes a faithful leader, a strong leader, to be able to lead with intention and have a vision that people can get behind. So I ask you this one question. What is your vision for your troops? Where are you sending them, and where does the battle not just begin, but where does this journey end? Where are you taking them on this journey, and what does paradise look like for you as a school leader? And what does paradise look like a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now for your team? What are the specific norms that you can create in order to meet that vision? It's one thing to visualize. It's one thing to journey map. It's one thing to communicate a future. It's another thing to be able to establish and put norms and beliefs and behaviors and choices in place to be able to hold people accountable to meet that vision. Now, let's just back up for a second, because one of the questions that I see just came in is, Kyle, what does accountability actually look like? And I promise we're going to get to that. But I want to just define what vision, norms, beliefs, where does that all, how do you do it from a step-by-step process? What's worked for us at the Culture Lab, and when we're working with teams and when we're empowering organizations to be able to do this work more intentionally, what works for us is once we've defined that vision, once we understand the end goal, just like we do with curriculum development in the classroom, we have to backwards design it. We have to, like Amazon calls it in one of their leadership principles, we have to start with the end in mind. When we're starting with the end in mind, we have to ask ourselves the people, the process, and the systems. Who are the people that need to be on our bus that can help us meet this vision? What are the skill sets? Where are the areas where they will be able to solve some of the challenges that we may experience? What are the cultural norms that we need to be able to establish? And what are some of the things that they have to essentially bring to the table? When I think about processes, what are some of the processes and standard operating procedures that we'll have to have in place in order for us to meet these expectations so that we can ensure a smooth bus ride or a smooth train ride towards where we're going? Where may we have to stop on the way to gas up or power up or have check-ins with our teams? And then I think about the evolution of that into what systems will we have to have in place in order to power up the people, but also power up the processes that are in place. Once we've established these processes and hired or recruited or empowered the people and implemented these systems, now it's time for us to connect behaviors and choices to those various things that will meet the vision that we're working towards executing towards. Now, let's put this in layman terms. If our vision over the next year is to increase academic achievement for our school, if our vision is to achieve $1 million in fundraising, if our vision is to achieve higher retention of our staff this year, what are the choices that we need to make, the intentional choices that we need to make throughout the school year that will lead us to this work? What are the behaviors that we need to commit to in our conversations, in our interactions with staff, in how we address discipline, in how we address behavioral issues, and how we engage with parents, and how we approach fundraising, and the marketing copy or material or assets when we approach development work? What are the behaviors and choices that will align with this specific standard? If our standard is excellence, what does excellence look like? And what does it look like in our classroom, in our marketing, in our team meetings, in our norms, all of these various things? Now, you asked the question earlier about accountability, so I want to be able to recap and come back to that specific question because it's so important. Accountability is one of those things that many leaders want from their teams, but what I've recognized many leaders do not do within themselves. Accountability looks like not justification. Accountability looks like looking at how you harmed a person or abused a system or disappointed or did not meet the expectations of the standards in which we set, and taking accountability for what happened, but not just what happened, what you caused. Now, when we look at accountability as a whole, one of the things that I've recently learned is the 4 bases of accountability. The first base is where 90% of not just leaders, but people sit in for a period of time. The first base we call is the first base of acknowledgement. And the first base, it's apologizing for the infraction, apologizing for the mistake, apologizing for the choice, apologizing for what led to something not meeting the expectations that was set. Many of us sit in this apology because it's easy to apologize, but it is not easy to step 2, base 2, change behavior and repair the situation. When we are having those crucial conversations or those moments within our organization where we recognize we did something out of pocket, or we recognize we dropped the ball, or we recognize we didn't meet the expectations that we set, then it's important for us to, yes, apologize and address it and acknowledge it. But what's most important is to identify, change, and repair the situation by changing you. Yes, I said you. Oftentimes we want to change systems, processes, people, without looking at ourselves as leader and asking ourselves, what do I need to grow in? How can I develop in order to become the person that can meet and lead this team to the destination that I'm trying to set? When we think about early days of Steve Jobs, even though he was an innovator and a creator and a visionary, he was also out of control. He would throw desks, he would speak vulgarly to people that he works with, and it led to him getting removed and fired from the company. Now, years later, they brought him back, and Steve Jobs created and recreated and reestablished Apple to be one of the world's most amazing and most valuable companies and most innovative organizations ever in the history of business and economics. Steve Jobs 2.0 was the leader that deserved the driver's seat on that bus. But Steve Jobs 1.0 had to die before Steve Jobs 2.0 could be evolved. In order for you to be the leader that takes your team, that takes your cohort, and that takes your organization to the next level, requires not just acknowledgement, not just the change of behavior and repairing the situations that exist, but third base, it requires planning, committing, and implementing a change in your life that applies to more than just this one situation. Better people produce better results. Better people become better leaders, and better leaders produce better results in teams, then ultimately create better schools. And many of the schools that I've had the privilege of touring and working with and partnering with and volunteering and speaking to, the higher performing ones had better leaders. The lower performing ones had not as great leaders. Leadership is the separation in schools from good to great or even terrible. So when you think about growing your school, when you think about moving your school forward, yes, fundraising is important. Yes, enrollment is important. Yes, academic achievement is important. Yes, teacher retention and quality is important. But leadership, by far, is the number one trait and number one skill that great schools possess. And it requires not just acknowledgement. It requires not just change of behavior. It requires not just planning and implementing a change in your life so that it can implement here. It requires a home run. So the fourth base of accountability is integrating these changes that you've made into your life to every single situation. How you do anything is how you do everything. You can't lie to your spouse and be an integral business leader. You can't cut corners at home and expect to excel in the workplace. There's no way that your house can be organized, but your office is a mess. How you do things personally will show up in your professional career. So in order for us to lead better teams, it requires us to audit, pull the curtain back, and recognize the places in our lives where we can be more accountable so that we can be able to grow our organization, our team forward by first growing ourselves. Now, what does this look like? What did that conversation look like that I had with a colleague and friend of mine that led to this conversation that we're having? In our teams, there's 5 things that I believe are paramount to us leading a school with not just empathy, but with excellence. Number 1 is acknowledgement and affirmation. Now, I've seen many people do daily affirmations. I am this, I am that, I am that. And I've never been that person that has woken up in the morning and talked to the mirror. But for many people, it works. And I'm not talking about writing affirmations down. I'm talking about what we possess and what we desire in relationships on a core level. Because leadership is not strategic, it's relationship building. Now, I'm not saying there's not strategy in leadership ability, but what I'm saying, the type of leadership that I'm talking about is a relationship building commitment and process that we go through. Many of us leaders do a great job with criticizing, coaching, mentoring, and pointing out specific gaps, problems, challenges, hurdles that our team individually or collectively need to do better in. If you ask a leader what are some of the gaps, they're quick to tell you. But if you ask them when is the last time they acknowledged and affirmed a team member, that may not be as a quick response. I remember having a conversation with a leader that I am still connected to today in Minnesota. And she said, I'm just not the warm and fuzzy type. I am going to give you acknowledgement and affirmation when you go above and beyond doing your job. And I feel her 110%. I do, though, believe that different people require different leadership styles. There may be people on your team that want to be acknowledged when they go above and beyond, but I want us to become those leaders that affirm before we criticize, that acknowledge before we challenge. I want you this week to see a team member doing something and acknowledge them. I appreciate you coming on time. Hey, James, I appreciate your board that you did outside of your classroom. Hey, I appreciate that conversation that you had with that student and encouraging that student. I want you to commit to that on a daily basis because it allows our team to be able to receive feedback better when it's led with heart first. Number two, many times when we have crucial conversations within any position, in any team, in even relationships, there's many times where we hold stuff in and we hold stuff in and we hold stuff in. And once it comes out as frustration or as aggravation or disgust. And it's not as well received as we would have enjoyed it or received it if it would have been smaller bite-sized chunks throughout a process. What this looks like in leadership is simply step 2 is setting new intentions with weekly check-in conversations, individually with staff. Are you the leader that meets with your team members one-on-one every single week? Now, I recognize schools are huge. Some schools have 20 staff members. Some schools have over 100 staff members. Is there a way in your schedule or even in the leaders that you are developing where you can have one-on-one conversations with your team members every single week? Now, that may be challenging. But that is one thing that will separate, again, those good schools from great schools. I've seen it done at high-performing schools where literally the executive director or the principal is having one-on-one conversations with each member of the staff from the cleaning service team to the executive leadership team every single week. Identifying gaps, celebrating their team, identifying holes, coaching them on various things personally and professionally. That's a leader that I would want to be on the bus with. Step number 3, set a new norm every single morning. Whether it's a morning announcement, whether it is something that you are committed to in your morning with your staff or with yourself, what are some new norms that you can set that will lead us to showcasing that we're committed to this vision every single day? What I've seen a school do is every single morning after the Pledge of Allegiance and after they get off the announcements, people come on and they talk about their vision of the school. And they read it and they recite it and they repeat it. And so that it's in the body and the mind of students, it's in the mind of teachers, it's in the mind of the substitutes, it's in the mind of all staff and contributors to the stakeholders of the school. How often have you read that vision statement? Do your students know it? Does your teams know it? And do you know it? Number 4, Before we jump into conversations, it's important for us to set intentions. Oftentimes, we have team members that may have challenges, they may have various things that are going on in their lives. And rather than being the leader that always fixes it, I want you to ask and set intentions before you fix problems where you can empower your team to do individually. What this looks like is early on in my career, I would always be that person that would maybe want to just decompress, go into a leader's office and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. I just need you to process through what I'm thinking and provide me guidance and direction so that I can move forward. It wasn't until I became a leader where I would have staff members coming into my office, offloading onto me, and me feeling like I had to fix their problems. I didn't get the response that I desired because it wasn't, in many cases, they didn't want me to fix it. They just wanted someone to listen, to see them, and to hear them. So one thing that I began to implement is to set intentions on the front end. Hey, James, hey, Mr. King, can we have a conversation? Yes, of course. I have 15 minutes. But before we begin, I want to know, what do you need? What does success look like in this conversation? Do you need me to solve a problem with you? Are you just kind of venting out loud? Or do you need a solution for the problem? That way, when they begin to speak, I'm in the mind frame of providing space for them to communicate, listening to what they need, but then also being the leader that they need in that moment. Now, some days they may need you to fix. Some days they may just need your ear. Some days they may need you to process it through with them. But this encourages people to understand what they need while you being the leader for them to guide them forward. And then number 5 is the most important. Be accountable. Be accountable and focus on changing, not just apologizing. Remember the 4 bases of accountability. Remember to set vision, but then also accompany that with norms, behaviors, and choices that will meet the expectations that you are setting. Remember to acknowledge and affirm. Remember to set intentions on a weekly basis. Remember to create morning norms where you're visualizing that vision. Remember to set intention at the beginning of conversations with your team and guide them. But ultimately, leading a school with empathy and excellence requires accountability, an active listener, and you activating something in yourself where you are committed to becoming the leader that your team needs. It's another episode of the Contagious Culture podcast, and we'll see you next episode.